I am on my knees for the international guest of honor, ladies and gentlemen.
This doesn't happen too often in my lifetime, I tell you.
I want to keep this brief, I really do, because I want you to be able to listen to John Harvey. It's been 10 years since he was in the States, and I am really thrilled that when I asked him to be international guest of honor, he said yes. It's been, through thick and thin, one of the reasons I was always so happy to be doing this. And interviewing him today is his very good friend, Mystery's very good friend, Mr. Otto Penzler.
The reason that I got roped, I mean, the reason I had the opportunity to be the interviewer for John is because, as a few of you will know, but not everyone, I am very proud to be John's publisher in America. He's been with me at Harcourt for 4 books, and I cannot tell anybody to the degree to which I'm proud to publish John. I have a wonderful list, wonderful writers on the list, but no one is better than John Harvey. And I've never had the chance to say it to John face to face. Thank you for letting me publish you. It's an honor.
Thank you.
As I think all of you know, John wrote a series of 10 novels and lots of short stories about Charlie Resnick, a policeman in Nottingham. And John lived in Nottingham for many, many years, although not a native. He's a native Londoner. So let me ask you first, John, if I may, where did Charlie Resnick come from? Who is he? How much of you is in him?
Okay, that'll take us a little while. Yeah, well, can I kind of go back slightly before that?
No.
Okay. I will anyway.
I knew that.
I'd been writing, you know, when I wrote the first Resnick book, I'd been writing for, I don't know, 10 years or so, writing pulp fiction, basically, learning my trade in the way a lot of people did. I mean, Elmore Leonard, you know, and numerous people before him, and Lawrence Block would be another perfect example, I guess. And I had tried writing crime novels before, and in fact, several people today have brought them out for me to sign and haunt me. Apparently they're going for a lot of money in the dealer's room, a complete set of The 4 Mysteries of Scott Mitchell, published by Sphere Books in 1976, I guess. I mean, embarrassing or what? I mean, great jackets, really of their time. Nice titles stolen from Bob Dylan lyrics. Terrible books. And I thought when I wrote those novels, crime fiction was something I couldn't do, you know, because I thought, when I wrote those books, I thought I was making the perfect kind of blend of Raymond Chandler-ish Private Eye plus a British setting. And I didn't. I mean, I failed. I think those books just don't work. And I thought, I can't do this. And I thought crime fiction wasn't ever going to be my thing, and I moved sideways into TV and did kind of some classy television adaptations for BBC classic serials and things like that. But then, 2 things happened. Firstly, I started reading Elmore Leonard, and not that my books, fortunately or unfortunately, are anything like Elmore Leonard, but it made me enjoy the experience of reading crime fiction again. And so I then thought, well, if it's this fun to read, maybe it would be this fun to write. And I still couldn't work out how to get at it. But then I'd been watching Hill Street Blues, which I loved. And I was able to get a television series off the ground in the States, in England, called Hard Cases, which was set in Nottingham. And it was about the probation service. But about the probation service workers and about the criminals that they dealt with and so on. And it was filmed on the streets in Nottingham. It had a multi-strand, you know, narrative line, just like Hill Street Blues. In fact, before I wrote the first episode, I went through Hill Street Blues with a stopwatch because I was fascinated how they could have so many characters. you know, and so many storylines running in just what would be 50 minutes or something. So I went through it with a stopwatch, and I had lots of colored pens, and I worked out, okay, Frank Furillo gets 1 minute 40 seconds here, somebody else gets 30 seconds here, and so on. And the first episode of Hard Cases I modeled almost exactly on that. But that got me into A, thinking I wanted to write about Nottingham in a kind of urban setting, and B, thinking I wanted a multi-strand storyline with one character at the center. So in my mind, Resnick, when I started writing about him, was going to be like Frank Furillo. He was going to be like the middle management guy, you know, who held off the bosses and got his team working as well as he could. And of course, you know, borrowing from Hill Street Blues, I was borrowing from your friend Ed McBain, which is where a lot of the Hill Street Blues stuff came from. And that was where Resnick began in my mind. This guy, this Frank Furillo-like guy in the center of all these activities. And I sat down with a British friend, a writer who's since long dead, unfortunately, well, quite long dead, who wrote, in fact, he wrote as Owen Brooks in the States. He wrote suspense novels and horror novels as Owen Brooks. And we just went through Resnick's character, and he asked me all the questions, you know, I should have asked myself, but writers are sometimes too lazy to ask. You know, where did he come from? What's his family and stuff? And then from that, I got the idea that his family would be Polish. Because I wanted someone at the center of the story who would be both inside and outside, who would have grown up in Nottingham, but with Polish parents. So he would have spoken English at school, he would have probably spoken Polish at home, and the fact that he was partly an outsider enabled me to give him, you know, certain characteristics which were slightly different, like the sandwiches. So he goes to the Polish deli, he buys all this great stuff, he goes home and puts it in between slices of rye bread. Even the fact that he liked jazz, you know, somehow the fact that he was, you know, from Polish ancestry made that possible too. I don't know how or why, except there are Polish jazz musicians, but it gave me a license to give him some sense of difference. And then I just got him out on the street, and yeah, that was the beginning, anyway, of where he came from.
You ruined my next 4 questions by going back and...
you could go back further.
I wanted to know about, you wrote about 90 novels in those 10 years, 90 pulp novels, didn't you?
That's a slight, no, by now I've written nearly 90.
Oh, I see.
In fact, the next book, although my British publisher, who's in the audience and won't thank me for saying this, I think is my 100th.
100.
You know, she wants to keep this quiet for very good reasons. Who wants to buy the 100th novel by some old guy? I mean, you know. I think there were about 45 Westerns, though.
45, and why, can I ask why you would have chosen Westerns of all genres?
You can, and I've got a 2-part answer, which may be as long as the last answer. I hope you're very patient out there. 2 reasons, really. Firstly, because New English Library in Britain, in those times, used to publish a lot of pulp fiction. I mean, books about bikers and books about skinheads and books about, and Westerns. And they had a series called Edge. Now, you know, paperback sales then are not what they are now. Edge was written by a British writer called Terry Harknett, who wrote them under the name of George Gilman, who's since retired happily with all his bling to the Dorset coast. And Terry wrote these books which were kind of like Clint Eastwoody sort of Westerns, but you know, they all had pictures on the jacket of Clint Eastwood looking like characters. But these books sold 100,000 copies each. 100,000 each.
Good reason to write them, isn't it?
And they published 3 a year, 3, 4 a year. So lo and behold, publishers, with due respect, being what they are, everybody wanted a Western series. But, you know, publishers also being what they are, they thought, oh, Edge was written by a British Western writer. We ought to get British Western writers to write our Westerns. And one day, I'd written a few books, a couple of biker books by now, and maybe, I think I wrote Kill Hitler Volume 1 also by this time. And Patrick Jansen Smith, of Transworld fame, who is still in the business, bless him, rang me at home and said, John, we're looking for someone to write Western series. Are you interested? I mean, you know, I'd been doing freelance writing for about 2 years. He could have rung and said, we're looking for someone to write women's knitting patterns. And I would have said, yes, just what I've been thinking about, Patrick. So that's the first part of the answer. And the second part of the answer is that my father was a big Western movie fan. And he took me to every Western movie that played in the whole of North London all the time I was growing up. I was kind of the last generation of people who went, you know, the whole family went to the pictures on Friday night. You know, you met after work, you went to the cinema, you got there halfway through the main feature. This is a great way to, you know, remember plots and be good at plots. You got there halfway through the main feature, you'd see the second half of the main feature, you'd have the lights, you'd have the ice cream, maybe occasionally someone would play the organ. You'd have the B feature, you'd have the news, then you'd have the first half of the main feature. This is about 2.5 hours later. We would get to the bit exactly where we came in, and my dad would get hold of our hands and say, right, we're going. But most of those films were Westerns, so I knew Western movies. So when Patrick said, you want to write a Western series, I just started rechanneling all those ideas from Western movies in Western fiction.
A phrase that nobody hears anymore, that those of us who are of a certain age will remember, this is where we came in. Because now we wait for the beginning of the movie, you know, but then it was when you got there, that's when you went into the theater.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, how did you do your research for the skinhead books?
Well, no, I didn't actually write any skinhead books, but I did write biker novels.
Biker novels.
Okay, I'd had a Honda 50. You know, I knew about being on a motorbike, so I had a Honda 50. I literally I did two things. I went to W.H. Smith, which is one of the, you know, mainstream booksellers in England, and I bought a little book about Hell's Angels. And it was kind of a little kind of paper, you know, with lots of pictures, and it told you what Hell's Angels did. And it told you, you know, what they called bits of their motorbike, and it had diagrams and things. So I did that, and I read... Okay, how it came about, the first book, there was a writer called Lawrence James, who I later went on to write Westerns with, who was writing biker books under the name of Mick Norman. And he'd written 4 or 5 for New English Library, very successful, and they wanted him to write another one. But he'd since moved on to headier things. So he said, he knew I was, you know, wanted to do something with my life, and he said, why don't you try and write a biker book? So I read the Mick Norman books, and I thought, well, maybe these are like Westerns, but on bikes. You know, they have a fight every second chapter and so on. So he helped me do a sample chapter and an outline, and we sent it off to New English Library with a covering letter from him, and they commissioned a book, £250, Avenging Angel. Great cover. And I sent them in the book, and they accepted it, and they commissioned Angel Alone for £300. And I thought, you know, this is great. So I gave up my teaching job, which is what I've been doing for 12 years till then. And, you know, that was me writing biker novels. You've progressed from the pulps to writing crime fiction of a very serious kind. I mean, in the best, I don't mean serious. I mean serious literature. Yeah.
And so you went from writing 3 or 4 or 5 books a year.
10.
10.
You
That's
know,
what I meant to say.
If you're only getting £300 a book, even in those days, that's not a hell of a lot of money. So you had to write 10, 12 books a year. But, you know, figure it out. They're 50,000 word books. That's 128 page paperback, I think. You know, you sit down and you write a certain amount a day, and within a month, you've got 50,000 words. I mean, the great thing about writing genre, I mean, really deep genre pulp fiction is, you know, it's like you know, walking along and you've got things to hold on to. It's like having a Zimmer frame and walking, if you like. There are so many kind of strict generic conventions. Mm-hmm. You don't have to actually exercise your brain too hard. You just come up with a few new twists on them. You know you've got to have a gunfight every second or third chapter. You know there are certain things you have to do. So it makes it easier to write. And I was being paid to practice for like 4 years. If you write 10 books a year for 4 years, hopefully you get a little better. Or you give up. But maybe I got a little better.
How did you find the transition from writing that kind of fiction, that pure genre fiction, to writing literary novels, which is what your books are?
Well,
Was it a conscious? Did you do it consciously, or was it just the nature of taking longer, thinking about it more, and wanting greater depth?
It was partly taking a sidestep into writing television adaptations. I did some Arnold Bennett books, Anna of the Five Towns, The Old Wives' Tale. You know, I kind of slightly sidestepped into a slightly more literary area, but in television. And then when I came back to writing fiction, Lonely Hearts, I think because of what I said before about the Elmore Leonard stuff and so on, and because I'd written the Hard Cases television series, I knew I wanted to try writing a longer book than I'd ever tried to write before. And Lonely Hearts, you know, was the result of that. But when I wrote that, I don't think I thought of it as being, you know, particularly as you describe it. In fact, after the first couple of Resnick books were published, I remember an American friend, a friend of mine in New York, saying, you know, well, this isn't just, you know, kind of crime fiction. You're writing about, you know, society, and you're writing about, you know, it's partly political, and, you know, and I said, come on, man, that's crap. It isn't. It's just a crime book. And it took me 3 or 4 books to convince myself, you know, that the books did have they were accruing a degree of depth. And maybe Lonely Hearts doesn't have it. I don't know. Maybe the more I wrote about it, the more I felt able to bring in more about what was happening in Nottingham, what was happening in society, to kind of try and make some alliance, if you like, between the kinds of crime and the kinds of criminals I was writing about with the social situation, the economic situation. I think that happened gradually. And I think, as far as the actual prose was concerned, if the prose kind of became better, whatever quite that means at that stage, that was a function of time. I mean, I had a year now to write a book, whereas I had a month before. And, you know, you're not on autopilot to the same degree. You can think about the sentences, you can think about the paragraphs, you can read other people who write well. You know, I read a lot of Graham Greene and a lot of Hemingway around about that time. Graham Greene to get an idea of what kinds of stories you could write, Hemingway to get an idea of style, I suppose. And it, you know, just gradually accrued.
Elmore Leonard compared your prose to that of Graham Greene. Did that brighten your day?
Oh, listen, anybody who says anything nice about, you know, my books brightens my day. I mean, I don't know if he's right, to be honest. You know, I mean, some very nice man, you know, for instance, said once about me that, and I say this not championing myself, because I think it's a slight hyperbole. It was something like, Harvey writes about the lower classes better than anyone since Dickens or something, you know, and you take things like that with a pinch of salt, frankly, you know, and, you know, I mean, nice as Elmore Leonard is to say that, you know what it's like with writers. Come on, sometimes, you know, an editor sends you a book and they said, oh, right, you know, can you read this and give us something nice about it to put on the back? And, you know, so I did think it was nice, but I didn't actually take it too seriously, in truth.
Elmore Leonard is one of the few people who means what he says. You know, there's a very famous private eye writer whose name I will not mention, who I have asked and who other people have asked to give blurbs, those little quotes that you see on jackets or on the front of paperbacks. And he said, I said, would you read it and give me a quote? He said, I'll either read it or give you a quote. So the sociological and political things that we find in the Resnick books started out accidentally, or
I think
just,
so.
Yeah,
I think they did.
But you're conscious of them now,
sorry,
aren't you?
I am.
Yeah.
I mean, it was accidental, except, you know, because I'd written that series about the probation service, that started to come in there, because you can't talk about those kinds of cases without talking about the backgrounds of the people. So I guess it kind of snuck off on me almost. Now I'm very conscious of it, and also conscious of the fact that to some degree I've left it behind. Because, you know, when I stopped writing the Resnick books with one setting of one city and went on, say, to write the Frank Elder books, which move around to different places, and they're kind of more like thriller stories rather than stories embedded in a particular place of society. So I think slightly unhappily from my point of view, I've moved to some degree away from that.
Mm-hmm. You, I think people were coming with pitchforks and torches when you ended the Resnick series. Why would you have? How could you have done that to your fans?
Well, the very short answer is there weren't enough fans. You know, I mean, it's true. It's true. The books had always sold comfortably in the UK and here, but sales had not increased with the degree to which publishers or publishers' accountants are happy. You will know this story as well as I. So that was part of the reason. You know, I felt that in sales terms, I had to watch out, you know. I think that was roughly the year in Britain that HarperCollins or someone got rid of their whole mid-list in a single swoop. I was looking over my shoulder. I thought, oh, hell, you know, something bad might happen now. Also, I'd not been living in Nottingham for a few years, so I didn't have that sense of knowing where I was writing about in the same way. And I felt I was getting lazy. You know, writers, you know this, should not get lazy. You do 10 books, you write a book a year about somebody, and, you know, you do get lazy. It's difficult to avoid it. I mean, you know, it's Monday morning. You come downstairs, you have your cup of coffee, you sit down at the typewriter or word processor. You're not quite certain what to do. You know you've got to do, I don't know, 1,000 words. You think, okay, I'll get Resnick to get up, he'll have a shower, he'll come downstairs, he'll feed the cats, he'll make his coffee, he'll make himself a sandwich, and that's my 1,000 words for the day. Thank you very much and good night. You can do that. And the problem is that on one level, that's what loyal readers want. They want to read about Resnick doing the same stuff, right? You want to read about the cats and you want to read about the sandwiches. And I can understand that, but for a writer to kind of have to keep doing that is not a good thing. So I think it's a bit of a catch-22 situation. So I thought from my writing point of view, I needed to move on. And I thought from my career point of view, I probably needed to move on.
How did that work out? Because Holt, who had published you for 10 consecutive books, when you ended the Resnick series and wrote what is now a standalone novel, dropped you.
Well, Marion Wood, who had been my editor at Holt, and a wonderful editor. I mean, it was a kind of slightly strange situation because she was basically, although they were published in England first, she did more actual editing of those books than my English editor did. And I had a really strong relationship with her. She left Holt to go to Dutton, I think, was it, or some part of Penguin. Somewhere. And, you know, this has always surprised me. You know, one of her authors at Holt was Sue Grafton. I was another one. She took Sue Grafton with her and left me behind. I mean, you know, where's the economic sense in that? Can you understand? So
what was she thinking?
Yeah, I know. So I was kind of cast adrift here. That's what happened here. Yeah.
I will go back to Resnick, but I just want to raise the subject of Frank Elder. I don't know how many of you have read the Frank Elder books. I will say this, and I know that John will accuse me of hyperbole, but this is from the bottom of my heart. I think the Frank Elder trilogy is the greatest trilogy in the history of crime fiction. It is, if those of you, has anybody read them? Has anybody read? Oh, God love you, yes. I think it's one novel. I think it's one giant novel that has been separated. Each of them are very large books, and they necessarily had to be separated. But if you can read that trilogy without crying, you have no soul. You have no hope. Just go home and kill yourself now. That I have seldom in my life been so moved by reading a crime novel or a novel, because they're really novels that have crime as a very important element. And I'd like to know, where did this come from? This terrible, poignant situation that Elder found himself in. Where did this come from your heart?
It's, Yeah, I probably need to backtrack slightly, but I will get to the heart of your question. What happened after, you know, the Resnick series finished on both sides of the Atlantic? I wrote, as you say, this standalone novel, In a True Light, bits of which I like a great deal and bits of which maybe don't quite work. And I kind of knew I had to write a different kind of book at that point. I also, various things happened. My partner had a daughter, so I took 18 months off from writing altogether to look after her while Sarah went back to work. So I had a lot of time to think. You know, if you're kind of pushing a stroller, as you call it over here, around, round and round and round, you do have a lot of time to think. I changed agents, and I thought I was going to have to change publishers because, you know, Random House, who'd been publishing latterly the Resnick books in England, as I say, it hadn't been great. So, and I thought I needed to write what publishers wanted them, which they wanted a longer book. You know, publishers will always say, we want a big book. So I thought I've got to add another 20,000 words on, and I thought I had to write something that was more of a thriller, by which I understand someone in jeopardy. More plot than in the Resnick books, people in jeopardy, more excitement, more narrative, more story, another 20,000 words, different kind of book. So I thought about that during the time I wasn't writing. And then, I don't know, my tame psychologist would say, okay, you've just had a new daughter, and what do? You write about this man who has problems with his teenage daughter. I mean, go figure. So that was the thing. But I'd previously written a short story about Frank Elder and to which there's one scene with his daughter in this book. But it had kind of snagged in my mind. I liked the relationship between Elder and his wife and his daughter in this other story. And so while I was thinking in this 18 months, what was I going to do? I thought, okay, that's what I'll do. I'll write about this man. I'll develop the relationship with his daughter. I'll push them as far apart as I can, and then see if I can some way bring them together again. And you're right in my mind what you say. I mean, those books are about his relationship with his daughter, and that's the arc of the books. And that's why I don't want to write, although my editor out there won't thank me for saying this, I don't really want to write another Elder book, I don't think, because I think that story's finished. I think that story's through.
Well, is it possible that maybe there's another Elder story that doesn't involve his daughter? Because he's a wonderful character. He
is, but the trouble is, for those of you who don't know the books, I mean, he's retired and he's gone down to live in Cornwall, which is about as far as you can go. And, you know, in each book I had to find a reason for bringing him up. This is kind of like Shane or whoever, riding up from the West to solve, you know, it's like all those old cowboy novels I wrote. I don't know how often you can do that. Yeah. So I guess I'd have to relocate him, and in a way I'd rather leave that be and write about other characters and, you know, just kind of move on, really, I think. But, you know, I said I wasn't going to write another Resnick novel, and I've just written one after 10 years, so who can say?
I know you have. Why did you go back to Resnick suddenly? Originally you said that one of the reasons that you stopped, apart from the sales or lack thereof, was that you felt separated from Nottingham because you were no longer living there. Well, now you live in London, and yet you've written another Resnick novel.
We moved back to Nottingham for 2 years before. We went to Cornwall for a year, and then we went to Nottingham for 2 years. So I did kind of I kind of refound the place. But the other reason for writing the new Resnick book is I wanted to write about grief. Several friends of mine, good friends, round about my age, had died. And I wanted to use that. That sounds kind of, you know, I don't know if that sounds quite a nice thing to do, but I wanted to use it, but I wanted to see if I could really write as well as I could about that experience of grief. And I thought Resnick was the character I knew best that I could do that through. And it was a thing about, could I write about grief convincingly within a crime novel? And so, you know, I'm still writing a crime story. It's got to move along. It's got to have narrative pace, but yet convey those feelings. And that was my kind of challenge to myself, if you like, was to do that.
Of all your books, and I didn't read the pulps, but I've read all the others, and of all of them, there's never a greater shock than in this book. I will say that. For those of you who haven't read it yet, just be wary, is all I can say. One thing about Resnick that I found pretty interesting is he's got a pretty good love life, pretty interesting, pretty complex love life. Sort of keeps moving along, doesn't he?
Well, you know, it's vicarious pleasure. What can I say? I mean, that's one of the things about writing. You know, if you can't do it, let your characters do it for you. That's what I've always, that's what I've always felt. Yeah.
So it's all fiction then.
Oh yeah. What you have to do is a limited amount of research, but in my case, that's just memory rather than anything else. It's interesting though about Charlie, because although he does have a degree of, you know, kind of success, if you like, it never ends too well. And it's interesting the way he's treated though by readers, because women want to kind of mother him. Women who read the books, that obviously it doesn't apply to all of them, but a lot of women readers want to kind of mother Charlie and look after him. And when I used to tour the States quite a lot, you know, people would come up at readings and say, I know exactly what Charlie needs, and, you know, implying I'm the person to, you know, whereas men, you know, men send me cassettes and CDs of music for him to listen to. It's a quite different, you know, way of looking at the character. So yeah, he has a certain degree of, yeah, but you know, he wouldn't do for him to be lonely all the time, would it?
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
You made a slightly bitter or sarcastic notion of publishers a moment ago.
Oh.
Although you published for more than 20 years, didn't you?
I did.
Yeah.
I did.
What was that about?
Well, I ran a small press called Slow Dancer Press, which began and was primarily a poetry press. We published a magazine, we published pamphlets and chapbooks and occasionally books. We published some American poets towards the end. We were the first British press to publish Sharon Olds in book form. We were the first British press to publish the African-American writer Lucille Clifton in the UK in book form. We published some of James Schuyler's poems for the first time in the UK. Latterly, we published some crime writers who hadn't been published in England. We published Julie Smith in England for the first time. We published Bill Moody, books of his that weren't published over there. We did that for kind of 20 years or so. And then, well, you know about this better than I do. The money ran out, the inclination ran out, the energy ran out, and then it stopped. But it was a great thing to do. But I think all small presses, if you're running them mainly yourself, you can only run them for a certain degree of time.
Right.
That's what I feel.
And as long as you could afford to run.
Well, that helps. Yeah, that helps. Yeah.
I think it's probably time to see if any of you all have questions for Mr. Harvey. Now's your time. Now's your opportunity. I'll ask one more then. While you're thinking. While you're thinking. Because I just thought of one, but I'll do you now. Are we going to have, if you're not going to write another Elder, and you've come back to Charlie, are you going to write another Charlie?
Well, maybe is all I can say. I mean, I wrote the book before Cold in Hand, which is the 11th Resnick book, if you like, was a book called Gone to Ground, which has two police characters, as you know, Will and Helen. I wanted to write about a happily married policeman with children. You know, they're a rarity in British crime fiction anyway. So Will was my attempt to do that. I wrote about them first, actually, in a story that Bob Randisi commissioned, a short story. And after he got it, Bob emailed me back and said, look, you have to write about these people in a book. So, hence Gone to Ground. And the book I'm working on now in England, which currently is called Far Cry. It was called Almost Grown, and then it was called Skin Deep, but now it's called Far Cry, has Will and Helen in it. So that's the next book. After that, I honestly don't know. I mean, yeah, I honestly don't know. It's a matter of either what goes on in my head, what my editor and publisher who's out there, and my agent who's also, bless her, out there, advise me in these matters. But I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, you had a question.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Mr. Harvey, just relating to the perennial question of characters versus plot. With a standalone, you have both the characters and the plot to support an entire book, whereas with a series, you constantly have to find new plots for the same characters. Which is more challenging, which is more interesting, and how do you feel about the difference?
I'm not sure if I recognize the difference in the kind of absolute terms that you express it. I mean, with me, sometimes the idea will come first of the kind of mood, if you like, of the book, which in Cold in Hand, as I say, was grief. Sometimes the idea will come to me in terms of a plot situation, which is Far Cry that I'm writing now. I don't particularly want to say what it is. Sometimes, as in, say, Cold Light, the last sentence of the book will come to me, and then I'll have to try and find a story that goes with it. I guess if you're writing a series, it's easier. You don't have to think about the characters so much, so that maybe you're right. Your main concentration is on finding a story for them. But yeah, I don't know whether there's a radical difference in my mind between doing standalones and. I mean, mostly I've actually only done. I think I've only done one totally standalone book, which was In a True Light. And the other books, like Gone to Ground and so on, I'm picking those characters up again. So, I mean, in my head, you see, they're all there. I mean, they do kind of intercross and intersect and odd little characters. I mean, Resnick has a walk-on part in the Jack Kiley books, or two of them. Lynn Kellogg has a walk-on part in one of the Kiley books. I've written a...
Karen Shield went from elder to...
Exactly,
yeah.
Karen, and she may, in fact, be the main character in the next book. That's one thing we're discussing. I've written a book for young adults called Nick's Blues, and the policewoman in that is the policewoman who appears in both one of the elder books and an early Resnick short story. So in my head, these characters all, they occupy two spaces, really, the Nottingham space and the North London space, with a little diversion down to Cornwall. So you kind of pick on whichever character you think fits the story, I think.
Yeah.
You said you wrote westerns. I'm a little bit confused. Are they American westerns written by Englishmen, or are they English westerns written? And I've never heard of an English western.
No,
there was no English western.
Yeah. They're American westerns, yeah, written by an Englishman. I mean, wonderful series like Heart the Regulator 1 to 10, Herne the Hunter 1 to 24. Some slightly less successful series. Peacemaker didn't do very well. I can't tell why. We used to write these books alternately. There were 3 or 4 of us: Lawrence James, Angus Wells, both now sadly deceased. Several other people. The idea was to get as many publishers publishing you as you could, but of course they wouldn't all publish, they didn't all want to publish you under the same name. And also 2 names would look too bulky on the jacket, because the spines of those books were so thin, you could only just about get 1 name on. So we would kind of think up a series like, say, Herne the Hunter, and Lawrence and I would think that up, and then we would decide, okay, you write book 1, I'll write book 2, and so on. So we would take it in turns to write these books. And occasionally we would write bits of the same book, and so on. And the only way I can tell which are mine is mine are the ones with the miserable endings. If Angus wrote that, if I look at the book a book I shared, say, with Angus, at the end, it all guns blazing and the hero strides away into the sunset. And if I wrote it, it's kind of, he doesn't die, but awful things happen around him. I mean, that's, yeah.
Who else? Yes, sir.
How did I come to Thelonious Monk? When I was at school, and in the, I guess I was kind of 16, 17, 18, and I'd been listening to a lot of jazz in London and going to jazz clubs with my friends. And my friend Tony decided he was going to learn the saxophone. And he'd actually been listening to Dave Brubeck, and he wanted to be the new Paul Desmond. and I wanted to play the drums. So he bought a saxophone, and I couldn't, this is sad, sorry, I couldn't afford drums. So I bought brushes, and I played on the back of a suitcase. And we would play in his bedroom until his old man threw us out. And then after that, we hired a pub room, and then I did get some proper drums, and we played. And Tony came home one day with this Thelonious Monk Plays Duke Ellington album. It's got an Henri Rousseau picture of a kind of jungle on the front. Those of you who are jazz lovers may well have seen it. And that was my first introduction to Monk, was this wonderful version of tunes I knew, but he made them sound different. You know, he made them sound different. It was amazing to me. And from then on, you know, I just listened and listened and listened. And I've got more Monk CDs in my and albums in my collection than anybody else. I've always really liked his work. Yeah.
Do you still play?
Your thought process sound more like Sonny Rollins than
Well, I think that's nice of you to say so. Although, you know, I don't know, some of the novels are a bit fragmented, I think, in the way that his playing is. So maybe there's influence all around. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Do you still play?
I used to play the drums badly. Jeff Deaver, in his exceptionally nice piece, my God, I couldn't have paid the man to write anything nicer in the program, suggests that the fact that I used to be a drummer, you know, has positively influenced the rhythm in my writing. As I said to a group of people this morning, I hope not, because believe me, I was not a good drummer. So if the rhythm in my books was as bad as it was in my drumming, you know, you wouldn't be sitting here now. So no, I've played twice in the last 26 years. Once in Romania on a British Council tour where we all got so smashed. And the poet George Surtees owned up to the fact that he could play the blues in 2 keys. And a critic from the TLS owned up he could play trumpet. So we went and sat in with the Romanian band. And once more recently in Nottingham, when I had enough Jameson to dare and go and sit in. The embarrassing thing, again, as I said on the music panel this morning, I was no worse now than I was when I played 2 or 3 times a week. So that can tell you what my drumming was like.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
We talked earlier this morning about poetry and choosing the right word.
Mm.
Do you think about that, especially when you do your first sentence or your first paragraph to sort of set the book?
I think about it all the time. I mean, in my terms, I think I write slowly, and so the draft that would be my first draft would be quite a careful one. And I do think a lot about word use, and partly that does come from having written poetry for quite a long time and read quite a lot of poetry. I do always hear it in my head when I'm writing it, and so that the word choice is right. And I think it's true to say that given a situation where I could choose, say, one of 4 words, I'll choose the one that sounds right, even if it might not be quite the best, you know, because that's the one that I like the sound of. So it is important to me, and it's important to me, and I do try and do it as I go along, which means I'm kind of slowish. I mean, I think some writers get it down and then go over it and revise it, whereas I tend to, you know, try and go more or less sentence by sentence. Yeah.
Yeah.
Often for a reader, at least me, the ending of a book is the most disappointing part of the book.
Yeah.
Is that also the most disappointing part?
Which of my books did you have in mind? No, I think you're right. And in truth, if I were to be the honest person you'd expect me to be, I do think I have a problem with endings. And some of my books I like more because the ending I think is kind of okay. I think in a lot of my books they kind of tail down at the end more than they should. I mean, a book like Cold Light in the Resnick series, where Lynn Kellogg is kidnapped and she needs to be rescued in the end, and the story actually goes to the last line. And that was the book where I wrote the last sentence of the book before I started. So in a way, because I knew the last sentence, maybe that ends particularly well. Easy Meat, I love the ending of, because I think it's really kind of strong and surprising. But I do think in some of my books, especially maybe the Resnick books, they do kind of tail out a little at the end. And I do think it's a real problem. And I can't honestly say that I think I've always successfully solved it by any means. But, yeah, I'm trying.
Also, I'm just wondering, it sounds like you don't really know the whole story yet when you start writing?
It depends. It depends, frankly. With the Resnick books, I used to be usually a bit more cavalier about it. And I used to kind of know the start, and I used to use a whiteboard and kind of do things in a circle with different colors, you know, because I used to be a school teacher, and school teachers love different colors. So I had all these different colored bits all over the board in a circle, and then the main incident was in the middle, and I would kind of choose which way to go, and the different colored bits of the plot would line up. So I'd have a vague idea of the end, but I wouldn't know how I was going to get there. I think since Flesh and Blood, I've been stricter with myself, partly because the books are longer, partly because they've got more story, and partly because, you know, frankly, at my age, I forget things. So if I don't plan it out fairly carefully, I'm liable to, you know, be in real deep doo-doo. So, yeah, I plan more, and now I know more about. I think I know more about where the end's going. Although, having said that, I sometimes change my mind. Which was it? In Gone to Ground, I changed my mind about who the main murderer was about 4/5 of the way through the book. I think what I do is to set up 2 or 3 people who might have done whatever the dastardly deed was, and give them all some kind of motivation and opportunity, and then choose. And then about 4/5 of the way through the book, make a definite choice. And in that book, I thought I knew who it was. But then when I got that far, I thought, no, this is too obvious. I've got to find a way of changing it. So then you go back and you tweak little things and you change things to make it, you know, make it possible. But I adapted one of my books for the radio, and I changed the killer in the radio adaptation because. Which one was it? It was the one about the hospital, I think it's Cutting Edge. When I rewrote it for radio, because I rewrote quite a lot of the dialogue for the dramatization on radio, because you changed the dialogue, the characters changed, you know? So they weren't quite the people they were before. So the person who actually committed the murders in the radio version was not the same person who committed the murders in the book. Did I get letters? No. Did anybody listen? Probably not.
Do you still write for radio?
I haven't done for a couple of years. The last thing I did was, what I love doing for radio is dramatizations of other people's work. You get to work with this great stuff, right? I've done 2 Graham Greens as dramas for radio, The End of the Affair and something else, Heart of the Matter, thank you, The Heart of the Matter. I've done 4 A.S. Byatt novels. This is classy stuff, right? The last thing I did was Paul Scott's The Raj Quartet, which I wrote with Shelley Silas, which was something like 12 hours of radio, and I'm still recovering from that. I would like to do something else. It's just a matter of finding the right project.
BBC still does stories on the air.
BBC still does drama. Yeah, I mean, 4 or 5 pieces of properly acted drama each week. It's extraordinary, and it's great to do because those of you who write know, you know, most of the time you're doing this stuff on your own, and working in radio, it's wonderful because you're working with other people. You know, and not too many other people. It's not like TV where the minute you get out there are 26 people standing around holding bits of cable and you don't quite know why they're doing it or what it's for. In radio, there's just, you know, maybe 3 people plus the actors and you. So you feel a part of the process, and it's really great to do.
Anybody else with questions?
Oh, we could go. Oh, no, can't.
Well, no, we have to be here another 5 minutes, so you better think of a question. Yeah.
Mr. Harvey, you get a call from Noah, and he says the Ark is leaving soon, and we only have room for one of your books. And could you send over your favorite book, but don't send one of your westerns? Which one would you like the Ark to sail away with?
Easy. It's the most recent. It's Cold in Hand. Partly because it's the most recent. I think it's the best thing I've done so far. I don't know whether you'd agree. I know you really like the elder books. I think Cold in Hand's the best thing I've done so far partly because I think it does the grief thing well. I think because it's got a pretty good plot twist in the middle that kind of maybe you don't quite see coming. Yeah, I think if it was going to be one at the moment, that's what it would be. Yeah.
How about the one book by another writer that you would take?
Well, on one hand, it would be a Hemingway, and it might be Farewell to Arms, but I'm going to answer this very quickly with lots of books, because it can't be. I mean, it could be Jim Crumley's The Last Good Kiss, because poor Jim, died last week, this week, last week.
3 weeks ago.
3 weeks ago. I mean, not a surprise, sadly. He wasn't a well man, and he didn't treat his body maybe as well as he could. The Last Good Kiss, I think, is the best private eye novel written in the last, 30 years or so. Well, we'd argue about that. I mean, that's one wonderful book. The best crime novel I've read in the last 2 or 3 years is The Broken Shore by the Australian writer Peter Temple, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And, I wish I'd written that book, and probably I will. If I can just, There's someone at the back, Otto.
Yeah.
What do you read for fun when you're not reading crime fiction?
Fun? All kinds of stuff. Alice Munro short stories, the Canadian short story writer. I think she's probably my favorite writer writing now. I think she is just wonderful. I can't... what she's able to do in a short story with such wonderful prose, I think is totally, marvelous. And so... I read a lot of short stories. I read her, I read Laurie Moore, I read Annie Proulx. I love, American short stories. I'm about to reread Moby Dick. I just reread some D.H. Lawrence, The Rainbow and Women in Love. I'm reading Wallace Stevens' poems because I came across a collection that had an Edward Hopper painting on the jacket, and I thought that looked a neat book. I mean, really, I suppose what I'm saying is a whole bunch of stuff. And, sorry, that's not a very specific answer, but will that do? Okay.
And the question excluded crime fiction, but do you read crime fiction? And if so, who do you like nowadays?
I read less than I used to be honest, and that's partly because I think I'd kind of got a surfeit of it. It may be because there isn't as much stuff out there that for whatever reason, really appeals to me. But since I'm not actually reading a lot, I don't know whether that's true. On one hand, I read my friends, okay? Because otherwise they hit me. So, I read Billingham and Robinson and all those big guys, because they... I read Peter Temple, obviously. In fact, I've reread The Broken Shore 3 times in the last 18 months or whenever since it was published. George Pelecanos, I read as soon as it comes out. I read crime writers who don't call themselves crime writers, or at least their publishers don't. So Richard Price's Lush Life, I think, is one of the best crime books, although it's not sold as such, that I've read in the last year or so. I guess those kind of urban writers who deal with, who cover sort of the same ground that I do, right, but in American terms, are the people I like George. And Laura Lippman's 2 standalone books, I think, are wonderful. That's the general ballpark area, really.
Okay.
Casey Constantine. Oh. Casey Constantine. People don't read this guy. He can't get a publishing contract. His books aren't in print. He is just the most fantastic writer, isn't he?
I published Casey Constantine for many, many years, and we did everything I knew how to do. I couldn't sell him. Who here knows Constantine? Who here has read him? Oh, this is a very good audience, very sophisticated
you'd
audience.
expect it, wouldn't you?
Well, because you're probably the entire reading group that Casey Constantine ever had in his life. And he quit. He quit about 12 years, 10 or 12 years ago, because he simply couldn't sell a book. Couldn't make a living.
Yeah.
And he's just great. You're right.
Yeah,
I mean,
he is working on a book now.
Is he?
I don't, you know, he keeps taking it out, putting it away, taking out, putting him away. He's just about, though, to be published republished in France by Rivage, who've been my publishers in France.
Right.
You know, so thank God there are people out there who recognise, you know, just how good he is.
Mm-hmm. And
you know, I very much hope that the book he's working on will get finished and then find a publisher, because I think he's wonderful.
oh, if he finishes it, he'll have a publisher.
Okay.
I assure you. Time for one more. Yes, ma'am.
One last question. I manage an independent bookstore, and one of the things that seems to sell books is cover art now. And it doesn't matter if it's a catchy title, the book sells, or if it's a bright orange or a bright yellow. Is that a big issue right now with you and your publisher?
Do you want to answer that first, mate?
Well, the question, if you couldn't hear in the back, was this lady runs a bookshop, and she said what is helping to sell books these days is not so much the cover title, or other elements, so much as the actual dust jacket itself, or the cover of the book itself. And is that an issue? So I will answer, because I spend a lot of time with covers, with jacket art. And what we've done, as a matter of fact, with John's latest book is brighten it a little bit. Because the books tend to be somewhat dark.
Somewhat?
Being gentle. We tended to put dark covers on them because it kind of let people know what to expect. But this time we're using a much brighter cover. You've seen it, I take it.
Yeah.
And I think it's a very good cover, and I think it's something that we do need to do. Not that this is not a dark book. It's a very dark book, but we want people to read it. We want them to pick it up. So I'm tending, and I've done a lot of dark covers over the years because I publish a lot of dark crime fiction. But I think we're trying to get away from that a little bit and use a little bit more colorful covers, a little, perhaps I won't use the word flamboyant, but certainly not so dark. So yeah, we do pay attention to that quite a lot, and I hope this is going to help John sell even more books.
I do think it's very important. I mean, as Otto said, they've slightly changed the cover style on the Harcourt books over here, but having said that, the Harcourt titles that, you know, like the ones you had in your book bag, I think they're great covers. I mean, they may not, you know, they may not sell quite as well as the one that we've got now, but they're really stylish. I'm really, really happy with them. I think people do take it seriously. I mean, in the UK, Random House UK, I know, you know, start talking about the cover of the books, and they have weekly meetings about covers and heaven knows what, and they work on these things, and because, you know, I happily am able to be included in this conversation and work with them. And I mean, the book I'm working on now, which won't be published till May or June of next year, we already have, you know, covers that we're looking at and you know, discussing the color, and should it be darker and should it be slightly lighter, and you know, so those things I think are taken absolutely seriously, and I agree with you. I mean, are crucial, and in fact have always been crucial in everything I've done. You know, the reason people bought Avenging Angel, God bless it, back in 1975, was because of the cover. You know, the cover advertises what it is, and I think that was the case, and it still is the case. I think it's very important.
To some degree, you can tell a book by its cover.
Yeah, it's true.
Contrary to cliche. I think that'll do it. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well done.